Welcome to Medieval History Channel 97, where the echoes of the past come alive. Step into the world of knights, castles, and forgotten legends as we journey through time together. Let history speak. Hey there. Tonight, we're going to step into a world that will make you feel profoundly thankful for that hot shower you took today. Seriously. Because we're about to take a journey back into the heart of Victorian hygiene, or more accurately, the shocking lack of it. And trust me, this isn't just history, it's a full sensory experience, so buckle up. It's going to be messy, grimy, and downright eye-opening. You know those elegant portraits of women in layers of silk and lace, men in top hats and polished boots? Yeah, well, brace yourself, because beneath all that glamour, there was a whole other story going on, one that definitely didn't smell like roses. By the way, if you're enjoying these late-night time travel stories, I'd truly love it if you gave this a like or hit subscribe. And hey, I'm always fascinated by where people are listening from, so drop your location and what time it is where you are in the comments. It blows my mind to imagine people across the globe drifting off to sleep to this. Kind of beautiful, isn't it? All right, wherever you are, get comfortable. Find that cozy spot. Let your body soften into the mattress or couch or blanket you're lying on. Close your eyes if you want to and take a long, deep breath in, then let it out slow. Feel your muscles release, your thoughts settle. You're safe. You're here. Now imagine this. With just one blink, you've opened your eyes to the year 1852. Welcome to Victorian London. And the very first thing that greets you, not the sights, not the sounds, it's the smell. It hits you like a wall, thick, cloying, and strange. The air is dense, almost chewable, like you could slice it with a knife and still not get through. It clings to your throat, sinks into your clothes, coats your tongue with something bitter and metallic. It's the scent of humanity, but not the romantic kind. Think human waste trickling through open gutters, rotting vegetables piled in alleyways, soot from 1,000 chimneys blackening the sky. Then there's something worse, something sweet and wrong and sour, the unmistakable stench of decay, of things that have died and been left too long. It's hard to name, but your body recoils instinctively. You know this isn't right. You shift in the bed, or what passes for a bed. Immediately, your skin registers the difference. The sheets are rough, maybe made of burlap or worn-out linen, if you're lucky enough to have sheets at all. They scrape against your skin like sandpaper. And the smell, it's not mold exactly, but old sweat, damp cloth, something musty and human that lingers no matter how long it's been aired out. No fluffy pillows, no clean duvets, just layers of fabric stiff with time, heavy with history. And here's the good news. You're alive. That's pretty much it. The bad news? Well, that's everything else. Let's talk about your surroundings. If you're poor, and odds are you are, because most people were, you're probably waking up in a tiny room the size of your modern bathroom. And you're not alone. Nope. You're likely packed in here with 6, maybe 8 other people. Could be your parents, siblings, aunts, cousins, could be complete strangers. Either way, personal space doesn't exist. There's no privacy, no quiet time. Just bodies, breathing, snoring, coughing, all crammed together in one dark, damp room. And it's not because people didn't care. It's because survival left no room for luxury. And in Victorian London, privacy was a luxury, cleanliness was a privilege, and a good night's sleep, that was a miracle. The room is maybe 10 feet by 12 feet. That's it. 4 walls, 1 low ceiling. And in that cramped, narrow space, dozens of bodies breathing each other's breath, living shoulder to shoulder, sharing not just the air, but the moisture in it, the smells, the sounds, the sicknesses. There is no such thing as personal space. You exist inside a collective rhythm, inhale, exhale, cough, whisper, snore, all overlapping like layers of invisible fabric you can't peel off. The walls, always damp, never dry, a sticky, clammy kind of damp that clings to your skin and never fully leaves. In the corners, there's something greenish growing, maybe mold, maybe mildew, maybe some strange combination of both. No one talks about it, no one points it out, but everyone sees it, and everyone chooses to pretend they don't. Because acknowledging it would mean accepting that it's growing there, and that it's winning. Your breathing slows instinctively. Inhale, exhale, as if your body is trying to adjust, to find some calm within this dense, sour air. The smell is hard to describe, part sweat, part soot, part something rotten that you can't quite place, but it's everywhere. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your skin. It follows you. Now, if you're middle class and lucky, things might be a little better. You might have your own bedroom, maybe even your own bed, a private little space to rest your body at the end of the day. But better is a matter of perspective, because your house, still no running water, still no electricity. That warm, bright bathroom you're imagining with the tiled walls and soft towels doesn't exist. Not for you, not yet. And here's where things get fascinating. Everyone back then believed they were clean, not just doing their best, but actually clean. There was pride in it, dignity. But their definition of hygiene, it was different, very different. Take bathing. You know that daily shower you take, that warm, pressurized stream of water that washes away your day, your stress, your sweat, that long soak where you lather, rinse, repeat, and feel human again? Yeah, forget it. It's not just unavailable, it's unthinkable. In fact, if you had suggested back then that someone should take a full bath every single day, they might have looked at you like you were losing your mind. Not just eccentric, dangerous. Because the prevailing belief wasn't just that bathing was unnecessary. It was that bathing too often could actually harm you. Seriously, they believed water in excess could weaken your body, drain your strength, disrupt your inner balance, in some cases even cause illness or death. So, what did people do? If you were wealthy or fortunate, you might bathe fully once a week. A proper tub, heated water, a little privacy, a small luxury. But if you were poor, once a month. Maybe. And even that was a stretch. Most days, cleanliness meant wiping your face with a damp cloth. Maybe a quick rinse of the hands, a dab of perfume or cologne to mask the rest. And that was enough. You exhale slowly, gratefully, because even thinking about their idea of clean makes you appreciate your own shower more deeply than ever. The steady warmth, the ease, the quiet miracle of hot water on demand. In a world where daily bathing could be seen as reckless, you begin to realize just how much of modern life is built on invisible privileges we rarely stop to notice. But here's the thing, they weren't just sitting around dirty. They had this whole system worked out. It was called a sponge bath, and basically you'd wash the important bits, face, hands, armpits, and the naughty bits. That was it. Everything else, well, everything else could wait until bath day. Picture this. You're standing in your bedroom, because that's where most people washed, next to a little wooden stand with a bowl and a pitcher of cold water. Cold, because hot water on demand was basically magic at this point. You pour the water into the bowl, grab a cloth or a sponge, and you just spot clean like you're detailing a car. But the car is your body, and the detailing is minimal. Your shoulders drop, releasing some of that tension as you imagine how different their mornings must have been. The wealthy folks had it a bit better. Some of them had these fancy copper bathtubs that servants would fill with hot water carried up from the kitchen. But even they weren't bathing daily, maybe twice a week if they were real hygiene enthusiasts. And get this, multiple people would often use the same bath water. Dad goes first, then mom, then the kids in order of age. By the time little Billy gets his turn, that water is, well, let's just say it's more like soup than water. Teaching people how to take a bath. Can you imagine Bath for Dummies? But in 1858, these books had rules because apparently that could kill you. Don't wash your face when traveling unless you can purify the water with alcohol or ammonia first. Take Russian baths where you wash your face with extremely hot water, then extremely cold water to prevent wrinkles. Getting more comfortable now, settling deeper into your bed? Honestly, their bathing advice sounds exhausting. Now, let's talk about teeth. Oh boy, let's talk about teeth. Toothbrushes existed, but they were expensive, and how do I put this? Not great. They had wooden handles and bristles that were basically just really stiff animal hair. Imagine brushing your teeth with a tiny scrub brush, one that costs about as much as you'd spend on groceries for a week. So what did poor people do? Well, they got creative. Some people used celery, just chewed on celery and hoped for the best. Others made their own toothpaste out of chalk, soot, or powdered cuttlefish bone. Yeah, cuttlefish bone in your mouth on purpose. Take a moment here. Reflect on how these seemingly simple daily rituals that we now take for granted, washing our bodies thoroughly every day, brushing our teeth with soft nylon bristles, and refreshing toothpaste, were once complex acts, laden with struggle and improvisation. Imagine the resilience, the resourcefulness it took for people to adapt, to create their own hygiene rituals with limited means and knowledge. This isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a profound reminder of how far human ingenuity and care have come. But also, it's a call to gratitude for the little comforts, for the small acts of self-care that today can soothe our souls and bodies without so much effort or fear. So the next time you splash water on your face or run your toothbrush gently over your teeth, remember the quiet perseverance of those who came before you, doing their best with what they had. And honor the simple grace of these everyday rituals that nurture your well-being now. And if you had a toothache, well, good luck with that. Most places didn't have dentists like we know today. Instead, you'd find yourself turning to the local barber or blacksmith. Yes, the very same person who cut your hair or hammered your horseshoes. This unlikely dentist would poke and prod around in your mouth with whatever crude tools were at hand. There was no anesthesia to numb the pain, no formal training to guide the process. Just a lot of hope that you wouldn't scream too loud or pass out from the agony. A yawn escapes you now, and suddenly you feel an overwhelming gratitude for modern dentistry. The gentle hands, the sterile tools, the science that makes dental care safe and almost painless. Now, hair washing was its own kind of adventure back then. Remember, there was no shampoo. So what did people do? Well, eggs were a surprisingly common remedy. Women would crack raw eggs over their heads, massaging the yolks deep into their hair as if they were preparing a breakfast omelet on their scalp. Then they'd rinse it out with pitchers of cold water. Imagine the scent lingering afterward, a mixture of raw egg and damp hair. Not exactly what we'd call fragrant today. Other popular alternatives included vinegar diluted with water, strong black tea, rum, or sprigs of rosemary steeped in hot water. Basically, if it was liquid and found in the kitchen, someone probably gave it a try as a hair rinse. The wealthy might have had access to more exotic or elaborate concoctions, but even their shampoos were often homemade mixtures, creatively using whatever was available. And here's the kicker. Hair washing was a rare event, maybe once a month, if that. Women treasured their hair as their crowning glory, piling it into elaborate styles that could last weeks. They would coat it with oils and pomades to keep it looking shiny and healthy, but those oils would inevitably go rancid over time, leaving the hair smelling faintly of spoiled fat. Lovely, right? You shift slightly, settling into a more comfortable position as you imagine how different their daily routines must have been, how they adapted, survived, and even found beauty in these humble rituals. Laundry? That was a whole other ordeal. Without washing machines, every piece of clothing had to be washed by hand, a back-breaking, time-consuming task. Soap was expensive and often scarce, so people had to get creative with stain removal. Oil stains were tackled with chalk, blood and grass stains treated with kerosene, and stubborn odors fought off with milk. Yes, milk, a strange but effective deodorizer. For bleaching clothes, they would soak them in urine, human urine, because it contains ammonia, a surprisingly powerful cleaning agent. It's hard not to wince at the thought, but it worked. The entire process was long and exhausting. Hauling heavy buckets of water, heating it over fires, scrubbing each garment vigorously, then rinsing thoroughly. It was a ritual of endurance, patience, and determination. As you sit quietly with these images swirling in your mind, you realize just how much we take for granted in our modern conveniences. These simple acts of daily care, hygiene, and self-presentation, once so laborious and filled with compromise, now happen with ease, comfort, and confidence. It's a humbling reminder of the resilience, creativity, and grit of those who came before us, and an invitation to cherish the small blessings of today. And then hang it to dry. A full wash day could take all day, literally all day. So most people only did laundry once a week if they were lucky. Some people went longer, which means people wore the same clothes for days at a time, sometimes weeks. That beautiful Victorian outfit you're picturing probably hadn't been washed in a while. Nice and easy, just breathing and thinking about how much effort it took just to stay basically clean. Let's talk about underwear, or, well, the lack thereof. Most poor people didn't wear underwear at all. The wealthy might have had linen undergarments, but even those weren't changed very often. And women's clothing, oh boy, layers and layers of heavy fabric, corsets that hadn't been washed in months. petticoats that, let's not even think about petticoats. All of this clothing would absorb sweat, body odor, food smells, smoke from fires, everything. And it would just stay there, trapped in the fabric until the next wash day, which, remember, might not be for weeks. So picture walking down a London street in the summer. Hundreds of people, all wearing heavy, unwashed clothing, all smelling like, well, themselves, plus whatever they'd eaten for breakfast, plus smoke from coal fires, plus horse manure from the streets, plus, well, you get me. You get the idea. The smell would be intense, like a physical presence following you around. Something you could taste in the air. Your breathing naturally slows, settling deeper into this strange world where staying clean was a daily struggle. Nobody really won. And that was just personal hygiene. We haven't even talked about the streets yet. Oh, the streets. London in the 1850s was home to about 2 million people. That's a lot of people making a lot of mess. And there was no organized garbage collection, no street cleaning. People just threw their garbage out the window into the street where it would sit and rot and attract rats. Human waste was, well, that's a whole other story. Most houses didn't have toilets. Instead, people used chamber pots. Basically, you do your business in a pot under your bed, and then, well, someone had to empty it, usually into the street, or into a shared privy in the backyard, or if you were really lazy, just out the window. There were people called night soil men who would come around and empty the cesspools and privies, but they only worked at night because the job was considered too disgusting for daylight hours. Now, let's dive deeper into this reality. Imagine the sheer physical and mental toll this took on people. Laundry wasn't just a chore, it was an all-consuming ritual. From scrubbing heavy, grimy fabrics by hand with rudimentary tools to the aching arms that hung clothes on lines, drying under unpredictable weather, every step demanded time and effort that drained energy from other parts of life. For many, this meant wearing the same clothes, soaked in layers of sweat, dirt, and lingering odors, becoming a second skin, almost like a burden they carried silently. Think about the underwear situation, or rather the absence of it. For the poor, underwear was a luxury they couldn't afford or even consider. For them, it was a daily negotiation between comfort and necessity, where skin met harsh fabrics directly, and washing was a rare event. For the rich, even their fine linen undergarments were not frequently refreshed, a reminder that hygiene wasn't prioritized the way we imagine today. And women's clothing. These weren't just garments, they were constricting, multi-layered armor, corsets bound tight, petticoats fluffed and heavy, dresses made from thick fabrics that soaked in every scent and stain. Imagine the sweat that clung to those layers during a hot summer day, trapped against the skin with nowhere to escape. The smells, both natural and environmental, accumulated, embedding themselves into every fold and seam. And yet, this was considered proper and fashionable, a paradox of beauty and discomfort intertwined. Now, take a deep breath and picture the streets. A boiling pot of humanity, thousands of people moving through a maze of filth and stench, garbage rotting in the open, streets slick with muck, rats scurrying beneath feet, and the air thick with the pungent mix of smoke, manure, and unwashed bodies. The very act of walking outside was an assault on the senses, and breathing became an effort to filter out the overwhelming reality. The chamber pots under beds, it's almost unimaginable now, but this was everyday life. The sounds, the smells, the knowledge that someone would have to carry out the dirty, grimy task of emptying these pots into streets or cesspools, often by laborers who lived at the fringes of society. These night soil men worked under the cover of darkness, their labor both vital and reviled. Imagine the social invisibility they suffered, doing a job no one else dared, yet one that kept the city from drowning in its own filth. Through this lens, hygiene wasn't simply a personal choice. It was a relentless battle against circumstances far beyond individual control. And yet life went on. People loved, worked, laughed, and survived amid this struggle, their resilience quietly extraordinary. And where did all that waste go? Well, mostly into the Thames, London's main river, the same river people got their drinking water from. Yeah, think about that for a minute. Imagine the very water you depend on for life, carrying with it the remnants of everything the city wanted to throw away. It's hard to fathom now, but back then, the boundaries between clean and dirty, safe and dangerous were blurred almost beyond recognition. You settle deeper into your bed, muscles relaxing, as you try to imagine living in a world where the river you drink from is also the place everyone dumps their sewage. That slow sinking feeling washes over you, how vulnerable we are, how intertwined life and danger can be. Every sip taken, every meal cooked with that water was a gamble, a silent risk carried in the heart of everyday life. The horses made it worse. London ran on horsepower, thousands and thousands of horses pulling carriages, delivery wagons, omnibuses, and horses. Well, horses poop a lot. It was estimated that a single horse produced about 35 pounds of manure per day. Multiply that by thousands of horses and, well, you do the math. The streets were not just pathways, but rivers and mountains of waste, an unending challenge for a growing city struggling to keep its footing. All of this waste would pile up in the streets. When it rained, it would wash around, creating these, let's call them rivers of nastiness. When it was dry, it would bake in the sun and create clouds of dust that was, well, let's just say you didn't want to breathe it. And yet people did breathe it every day. They walked through it, they lived with it, and they thought it was normal because, well, everyone smelled the same. When everyone's environment is gross, gross becomes normal. The extraordinary becomes ordinary. That's it. Getting more comfortable, your muscles melting into the mattress as you think about how lucky you are to live in a time with soap, running water, and actual garbage collection. Every moment you have clean water, the luxury of hygiene, and safe streets, you are standing on the shoulders of those who endured, adapted, and imagined something better. The thing is, Victorians weren't stupid. They knew things were unpleasant. They just didn't really understand why people kept getting sick. They had this theory called miasma theory that basically said diseases were caused by bad air and bad smells. They thought if you could smell something foul, it could make you sick. Which, I mean, they weren't completely wrong. Bad smells usually meant bad sanitation, and bad sanitation definitely led to disease. But they thought the smell itself was the problem, not the underlying conditions causing the smell. So their solution was perfume. Lots and lots of perfume. Instead of fixing the source of the smell, they just tried to cover it up. Rich people would douse themselves in expensive fragrances. Poor people would use whatever they could find, maybe some cheap cologne or flowers or herbs. It was a hopeful but temporary shield against the harshness surrounding them, a small rebellion against the reality they couldn't yet change. And in that small act, there was a deep human truth, the desire for dignity, for beauty, for comfort, even in the darkest times. But here's the thing about trying to cover up the smell of unwashed bodies, unwashed clothes, and sewage-filled streets with perfume. It doesn't really work. Instead of masking the odors, it just creates this strange, almost sickly sweet combination, an uneasy blend that somehow feels even worse than the original stench. Imagine the sharp, artificial scent of vanilla air freshener wafting awkwardly alongside the unmistakable sour tang of a porter potty. That clash, that bizarre cocktail of scents, is essentially what the wealthy Victorians carried with them as they moved through their grand halls and ornate parlors. A soft, comfortable sigh escapes you as you picture it all. The complexity of it, the struggle, the sheer humanity beneath the layers of pomp and circumstance. You feel a deep sense of gratitude for our modern understanding of hygiene and disease, how far we've come in caring for our bodies and our health. And women had it particularly rough. Their clothing was an intricate, suffocating maze of layers upon layers, heavy fabrics piled high, corsets cinched so tightly they made every breath a conscious effort, and long, sweeping skirts that dragged along the grimy streets, gathering dust, dirt, and whatever else fate threw their way. They were expected, without exception, to look flawless, radiant, and poised at every waking moment. Makeup existed, yes, but it was a dangerous ritual. Face powders often contained lead, a poison lurking in plain sight. Rouge, that delicate blush on their cheeks, hid mercury within its rosy tint. These chemicals, unknown and misunderstood, quietly betrayed the very women who trusted them. Many Victorian women were literally poisoning themselves in the name of beauty, unaware of the invisible harm creeping through their bodies. And hair dye. Now that was something else entirely. A popular product called Hall's Hair Renewer promised to erase gray hairs and bring back youth's vibrant hue. But the secret ingredient? lead again. Imagine rubbing a toxic metal directly onto your scalp, day after day, wondering why exhaustion and illness became your constant companions. The quiet, relentless toll it took was staggering. You let your shoulders fall, the tension ebbing away as you reflect on how much knowledge we've gained about chemistry, about safety, about protecting our bodies from harm. It's humbling to realize the price paid by those before us. And then there were the beauty routines, born from necessity and creativity, long before the convenience of modern skincare. People invented their own remedies. Lemon juice was used to fade freckles under the harsh sun. Butter became a precious balm to soothe dry, cracked skin, and raw meat. Yes, raw meat served as a face mask. They literally slept with slices of raw beef pressed against their skin, believing it held the secret to youth and vitality. Imagine the scent in a Victorian bedroom, especially one belonging to the wealthy. It must have been a strange, layered fragrance. The iron-rich smell of raw meat mingling with the toxic dust of lead-based cosmetics, the greasy residue of unwashed hair coated in rancid pomade, all undercut by whatever perfume was desperately sprayed to mask the whole melange. Yet despite it all, you recognize something powerful. They made do. They adapted. Even within the harsh confines of their time, they found ways, sometimes imperfect, sometimes painful, to feel clean, to feel beautiful, to feel human. Attractive within the constraints of their world, it's actually kind of impressive when you think about it. Imagine living in a time where every day was a struggle, not just for comfort, but for basic survival. And yet people found ways to present themselves, to hold on to dignity, and even a flicker of pride. They were working with what they had, doing their best with the knowledge available to them. Even if that knowledge was limited, imperfect, or sometimes completely wrong by today's standards. Getting cozy now, really settling in, and there's something almost admirable about their resourcefulness. Despite the grime, the hardships, the constant battle with filth and disease, they found ways to manage. Their methods may seem questionable, even shocking to us now, but there was a fierce determination underneath it all. An unspoken courage to keep going day after day. It's this resilience, this sheer grit that quietly demands respect. The wealthy had servants to help with the worst of it, maids who emptied chamber pots with weary hands, laundresses scrubbing clothes till they were barely recognizable, bath attendants hauling and heating water for those rare, precious baths. But the servants themselves, well, they were often even dirtier than their employers. With no time or energy to care for themselves, they were caught in an endless cycle of hard labor, often sacrificing their own hygiene to maintain everyone else's. Poor people just did their best, sharing resources tightly knit by necessity, helping each other however they could. Cleanliness was a luxury, a distant dream, something they simply couldn't afford. Their focus was survival, finding enough food to keep their bellies from rumbling, enough work to pay the rent that might keep a roof above their heads, enough coal to chase away the biting cold. Hygiene was something you worried about when you had everything else figured out. And in 1850s London, most people definitely did not have everything else figured out. Nice and easy now, breathing deeply as you imagine trying to navigate daily life in a world where everything was harder. Picture a time when taking a bath was an event that required careful planning, a moment of rare relief, where brushing your teeth was a treat for the privileged few, where staying clean was a constant battle against a relentless, dirty world that never seemed to give you a break. The funny thing is, they probably would have looked at our modern obsession with cleanliness and thought we were crazy. Daily showers, changing clothes every day, washing our hands multiple times a day, they would have worried that we were washing away our natural defenses, making ourselves fragile and vulnerable to disease. To them, dirt was familiar, almost protective, a sign of strength and resilience rather than weakness. Different times, different knowledge, different priorities. But underneath all the dirt, smell, and questionable hygiene practices, these were still people. Still families trying to make the best life they could for themselves and their children. They fell in love with wild passion, told jokes that brought light to their darkest days, worried deeply about money and health, celebrated birthdays with whatever scraps of joy they could muster, and dreamed big dreams even when reality tried to crush them. And dreams and fears, just like anyone else, they just smelled a lot worse while doing it. Let that sink in as you settle deeper into this vision, that heavy, uncomfortable feeling spreading through your body. The strange world of Victorian London starting to feel a little more real, a little more human, despite all its challenges and unpleasant realities. It was a world that was messy, imperfect, harsh, but full of people just like us, living, loving, hoping, surviving. But let's talk about something that'll really make you appreciate modern plumbing. Victorian toilets, or, well, the lack thereof. You know that bathroom down the hall, the one with running water, toilet paper, and a seat that's actually comfortable? Yeah, forget about it. Most Victorians had never seen anything like that. Instead, they had alternatives. Your muscles relax as you think about how simple it is to just walk to the bathroom when you need to. If you were poor, and again, most people were, you shared an outhouse with maybe 100 other families. Picture this. One wooden shack built over a deep pit in a shared courtyard behind a row of houses. No privacy, no paper, no way to wash your hands afterward, just a hole in the ground with a wooden seat over it. The smell. Oh my God, the smell. Especially in summer, it was like a physical wall you had to walk through just to get close to the thing. And the flies, so many flies. They'd swarm around the opening and you'd just have to deal with it. A yawn escapes and you're suddenly very grateful for indoor plumbing. The wealthy had it better, but not by much. They had these things called water closets. Basically early toilets that were installed right in the house. Sounds fancy, right? Well, here's the catch. They didn't have modern plumbing. So where did all that waste go? Go straight down into a cesspool in the basement. Yeah, a big open pit of human waste directly under the house, just sitting there, fermenting. The idea was that eventually someone would come and empty it. But, well, that didn't always happen on schedule. When the cesspool got full, the smell would start seeping up through the floorboards. The whole house would reek. People would wake up in the morning feeling sick from the fumes that had been building up overnight, so they'd call the night soil men. Now, imagine standing in that same Victorian home feeling the thick, heavy air as the smell creeps through the wood beneath your feet, a reminder that progress is never to be taken for granted. The luxury of modern plumbing is not just comfort. It's a gift of health, privacy, and dignity that many before us never had. Back then, going to the bathroom was more than just a quick break. It was a moment fraught with discomfort, vulnerability, and a constant awareness of the unseen dangers lingering in the air. The shared outhouse, the ever-present flies, the unbearable summer stench, all of these painted a picture of how raw and exposed life could be. Even for the rich, with their water closets and hopes of cleanliness, the reality was far from ideal. The cesspool beneath their feet was a ticking time bomb of sickness and foul odors, a stark contrast to the modern toilets we now flush away without a second thought. So next time you hear the gentle sound of running water or feel the coolness of a tiled bathroom floor, take a deep breath and let yourself feel gratitude. Because these simple conveniences we have now are the result of generations who endured the unpleasant, the uncomfortable, and even the dangerous, so that we might live better, healthier, and with more dignity. And that, truly, is a legacy worth honoring. These were the guys who specialized in emptying cesspools and privies. They only worked at night because, well, the job was considered too disgusting for daylight hours. Can you imagine? The thought alone might make you shudder. The work was so gross that it was literally illegal to do it when people could see. The stench, the filth, the sheer nature of the task made it something hidden away in darkness, out of sight and mind. Your breathing naturally slows, was settling deeper as you try to imagine living above a basement full of sewage. The damp, suffocating air, the invisible threats lurking in every breath. These night soil men would show up with shovels and buckets and, well, they'd dig. They'd haul buckets of human waste up from the basement and load it onto carts. The smell during this process was in a pungent mix of decay, rot, and all the unmentionable things that come with waste left to fester in cramped, dark spaces. Neighbors would close their windows tightly, stuff rags under their doors, desperate attempts to keep the stench out, but somehow the foul odor would still seep through invading homes, making the very walls seem to sweat with it. And where did all this waste go? Well, that's where it gets interesting. See, human waste was actually valuable. Farmers needed fertilizer. And, well, human poop makes excellent fertilizer. So the night soil men would sell it. They'd cart it out to farms outside the city and sell it to farmers who would spread it on their fields, which means the vegetables you'd eat for dinner were literally grown in human waste from the city, where people were dying of cholera, typhoid, and God knows what else. The cycle was, well, it was pretty gross when you think about it. Getting more comfortable. And honestly, thinking about their farming practices makes you appreciate modern agriculture. But here's the thing, even this system was breaking down. By the 1850s, London was just too big, too many people producing too much waste. The night soil men couldn't keep up. Cesspools were overflowing, streets were flooded with sewage when it rained, and diseases were spreading like wildfire. People were getting desperate. Some folks just gave up on the cesspool system entirely. They couldn't deal with the overflowing pits, the constant stench, the sheer impossibility of keeping anything remotely clean. So they took the simplest route they could think of. They dumped their chamber pots right into the street, out the front door, out the window, into the nearest ditch, stream, or river. No shame, no hesitation, just splat and move on. And here's the terrifying part. All those little streams and runoffs had one destination: the Thames, London's main source of drinking water. So yes, people were literally drinking water contaminated with their own waste. They were scooping up what looked like clean, glistening river water and wondering why their families kept getting sick. Cholera, dysentery, mysterious fevers, infants dying. No one could quite piece it together, not yet. But the link feels so obvious now, doesn't it? Your shoulders drop a little, releasing that tight knot of tension. Because today it's common sense. Sewage and drinking water don't mix. But back then, the understanding of germs, of bacteria, of invisible pathogens, it didn't exist. Not in any meaningful way. And yet people knew something was wrong. You could smell it. The government knew. Scientists knew. Heck, everyone with a nose knew. But no one could agree on what to actually do about it. Bureaucrats argued. City planners proposed half measures. Some thought the answer was to build more cesspools. Others said, just dump everything into the Thames. It'll wash out to sea eventually. Still others shrugged and said, London's always smelled bad. Why change now? Then came the summer of 1858. Oh boy. The summer of 1858. It wasn't just hot, it was relentless, oppressive. Temperatures soared to levels London wasn't built for. Day after day of blistering sun, with no breeze, no rain, no relief. The Thames began to shrink, its waters pulled back, revealing the thick, glistening sludge that lined its banks. A sickly paste of human waste, dead animals, industrial runoff, and centuries of dumped refuse. And in that sweltering heat, it fermented. The smell wasn't just bad, it was biblical, apocalyptic. Imagine the worst odor you've ever experienced, now multiply it by 1,000. Then imagine having no escape from it. No air conditioning, no filtered air, no sealed windows, just breathing it in, every hour, every day. People vomited just walking near the river. Whole families fled their homes because they lived too close to the stench. Curtains soaked in vinegar were hung from windows in Parliament to try and block the smell. It didn't work. The odor seeped into everything. A quiet, almost disbelieving sigh escapes you, because today you flush a toilet and never think about it again. You toss out trash and it disappears from your doorstep. You drink from a tap and trust that what comes out won't kill you. Back then, the system was broken, if there was a system at all. The press gave it a name, the Great Stink. And it was great in the worst, most unforgettable way. Charles Dickens wrote about it. He called the Thames a deadly sewer. Not a river, but a graveyard of a waterway. Scientists started taking boat trips along the river, dropping pieces of white paper into the water to test how polluted it was. The paper disappeared instantly, swallowed whole by the brown, soupy filth. The river had turned into sludge, and still people were expected to live with it, to drink it, to bathe in it, to raise their children beside it. It took a disaster of smell, literal stench, to push an entire city to act. But you know what finally got the government to act? When the smell reached Parliament. See, the Houses of Parliament sit right on the banks of the Thames, and in the summer of 1858, with the windows open for ventilation, Well, the smell just poured in. Members of parliament were literally fleeing the chamber, handkerchiefs pressed to their noses, gagging and retching. They tried dousing the curtains with lime and chloride to mask the smell. It didn't work. They even considered relocating the entire government away from Westminster. That's how bad it was. The smell was so horrific that they were willing to abandon their brand new expensive parliament building rather than deal with it. Finally, they decided to do something about the sewage. That's it, just relaxing into the story, thinking about how sometimes it takes a crisis to force change. They put a guy named Joseph Bazalgette in charge of fixing London's sewage problem. Poor bastard, can you imagine getting that job? Hey Joe, we need you to figure out what to do with 2.5 million people's worth of poop. And we needed it done yesterday. But Bazalgette was brilliant. He came up with a plan that was, well, audacious. He wanted to build a completely new sewer system for the entire city, not just patch the old one, but build a brand new one from scratch. The plan involved building over 1,000 miles of new sewers under London's streets. These sewers would connect to main intercepting sewers that would carry all the waste downstream, away from the city center, way downstream, like 8 miles downstream, where it would be dumped into the Thames at high tide. The scale of the project was insane. They had to dig up half the city, demolish entire neighborhoods, relocate thousands of families, build massive pumping stations to move the sewage uphill, line everything with millions of bricks, and create embankments along the Thames to house the new sewers. Your breathing slows, nice and easy, as you imagine the incredible amount of work this must have required. It took years of constant construction, constant noise, constant disruption. Streets torn up everywhere, the smell of cement and brick dust mixing with the smell of sewage. Workers covered in mud and worse, digging tunnels deep underground. And the cost. Oh, the cost. In today's money, we're talking about billions of pounds, maybe tens of billions. The government had to raise taxes, issue bonds, borrow money from banks. People complained constantly about the expense. But you know what? It worked. When the new sewer system finally came online, the change was immediate. The smell disappeared, the Thames started running cleaner, disease rates plummeted, and people could actually walk along the river without gagging. It was like magic, all those years of living with the stench. And suddenly, it was just gone. Settling deeper into your bed, feeling that heavy, comfortable weight, and thinking about how amazing it must have felt to finally be able to breathe clean air. The new system wasn't perfect, of course. They were still dumping raw sewage into the Thames just further downstream, where it was someone else's problem. The pumping stations broke down sometimes, causing temporary backups and overflows, but compared to what they'd been living with, it was a miracle. Unfortunately, not everyone benefited equally. The wealthy neighborhoods got connected to the new system first. The poor areas, well, they had to wait sometimes for years. So while the rich were enjoying their new odor-free lives, the poor were still dealing with overflowing cesspools and sewage in the streets. Some things never change, right? But even for the poor, things gradually got better. As more areas got connected to the new system, public health improved across the board. Cholera outbreaks became less frequent, typhoid rates dropped, and people stopped dying from diseases that were entirely preventable. A yawn slips out, and you're thinking about how much we take for granted. Clean water, functioning sewers, toilet paper. Speaking of toilet paper, yeah, that wasn't really a thing yet. The first commercially produced toilet paper wasn't sold until the 1870s. Even then, it was expensive and not very common. So what did people use? Well, whatever they could find. Old newspapers were popular among the middle class. Corn cobs were common in rural areas. Leaves, if you could find them. Rags that could be washed and reused. The wealthy might have soft cloths or even sponges, but most people just made do with whatever was available. And since there was no running water in most bathrooms, well, hand washing after using the toilet wasn't exactly standard practice, which brings us back to disease. So much disease. Cholera was the big killer. It would sweep through London in waves, killing thousands of people at a time. Poor areas were hit hardest because they had the worst sanitation. But the disease didn't discriminate. Rich people died too, and doctors had no idea what caused it. Remember, this was before germ theory, before people understood that diseases were caused by bacteria and viruses. They thought cholera was caused by bad air, by breathing in the foul smells from sewage and rotting garbage. Imagine lying in your bed, feeling that weight of relief and peace, breathing deep the fresh air made possible by human determination and innovation. Yet, beneath that relief, the truth lingered. The system was flawed and unequal. The stark contrast between neighborhoods highlighted a harsh reality. Health and dignity were privileges, not guaranteed rights. Think about the everyday challenges too. No running water, no soap readily available, no easy way to clean oneself after the most basic human needs. The crude substitutes for toilet paper, the absence of hygiene standards, all contributed to the spread of suffering that was preventable. But in the midst of this hardship, there was progress. Step by step, pipes were laid, pumps installed, and knowledge slowly grew. The future was being forged with all its imperfections and inequities, and it all started with that simple, profound desire to breathe clean air and live a little better. So as you yawn and settle deeper under your blanket, take a moment to appreciate the invisible miracles around you. Miracles born from struggle, ignorance, and hope. Your muscles relax, sinking deeper into the mattress as you think about how terrifying it must have been to live in a world where disease struck without warning and doctors had no clue why. Their treatments? Well, let's just say they were creative. They tried purifying the air with pungent herbs, burning sulfur or tar to fill rooms with choking smoke meant to drive away illness. They dosed patients with massive amounts of opium or alcohol, hoping it would help fight infection. Of course, none of it worked. People kept dying. Entire families could be wiped out in a single outbreak. Children were especially vulnerable. Meanwhile, the sewage continued to flow unchecked into the Thames, the very river people relied on for drinking water. Then there was John Snow, a doctor who made a groundbreaking discovery. Cholera was spreading through contaminated water, not through the air as everyone believed. He proved that drinking sewage-tainted water was the true culprit. But no one believed him. The medical establishment dismissed him as crazy. It wasn't until years later, after the infamous Great Stink, that his ideas finally gained acceptance. By then, thousands had died needlessly. You breathe out slowly, feeling the weight of frustration that must have come with knowing the answer, but being powerless to make anyone listen. Even after the new sewer system was built, old habits died hard. People continued dumping waste wherever was easiest. Chamber pots still emptied out windows, garbage still littered the streets, and factories kept pouring toxins into rivers. It took a generation for society to truly change, to realize that where you disposed of waste wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was about the health and survival of entire communities. Rivers were not mere dumping grounds, they were vital sources of life for many. The new sewer system was far from perfect, but it was a crucial beginning, a foundation for future progress. And progress did come. Over the decades, London expanded and improved its sanitation, building treatment plants, installing better pumps, connecting more neighborhoods, and regulating factory waste. You settle deeper, grateful for the unseen systems that protect us today, and inspired by the resilience and eventual triumph of human ingenuity over tragedy. Slowly, very slowly, London transformed from one of the dirtiest cities in the world to one of the cleanest. Your breathing naturally deepens, settling into that warm, heavy feeling as you think about the incredible transformation that happened over just a few decades. The irony is that all this infrastructure, the sewers, the treatment plants, the regulations, is basically invisible to most people. You turn on a tap and clean water comes out. You flush a toilet and waste disappears. You walk down the street and it doesn't smell like an open sewer. We don't think about it because it works so well. People like Bazalgette did their job so thoroughly that we can just take it for granted. But for Victorians, especially in those years before the new sewer system, dealing with waste was a constant daily struggle. Every trip to the privy was an ordeal. Every drink of water was a gamble. Every breath of air carried the smell of decay and disease. They lived with it because they had to, because they didn't know there was an alternative, because they thought that's just how cities worked. Getting more comfortable, muscles melting into the bed, and feeling so grateful for all the invisible infrastructure that makes modern life possible. Even their clothes reflected the reality of living in a dirty world. Dark colors were popular because they hid stains better. Heavy fabrics were preferred because they lasted longer between washings. Elaborate decorations and patterns helped disguise spots and smudges. Fashion wasn't just about looking good. It was about looking good in a world where staying clean was nearly impossible. Women's long skirts weren't just fashionable, they were practical. They hid dirty shoes and stockings. They swept along the ground, picking up mud and refuse, but that was better than having your legs exposed to all the filth in the streets. Men's dark suits served the same purpose. Coal dust, horse manure, sewage splashback, it all blended into dark wool. A gentleman could walk through the streets of London and still look relatively presentable when he arrived at his destination. Now, imagine this transformation not just as a physical shift, but as a profound victory of human ingenuity and perseverance. The city that once reeked of sickness and despair began to breathe anew. The labyrinth of sewers beneath the streets, unseen and unsung, carried away filth and disease, laying the foundation for a healthier, more vibrant life. Think about the people who lived through this change. The doctors who warned of cholera, the engineers who designed monumental solutions, the workers who labored in the muck. Their efforts were silent revolutions, invisible to most, but monumental in impact. The clothes people wore became armor, not just in fashion, but in survival. Every stitch, every fabric choice told a story of adaptation. They navigated a world where cleanliness was a rare luxury, where appearances were carefully managed against relentless grime. As you settle deeper into this reflection, there's a quiet awe for the progress that often goes unnoticed. Those everyday miracles like clean water flowing freely, sanitation systems working without fanfare, and a city transformed from sickness to health. It's a reminder that beneath the comforts we take for granted lies a history of struggle, innovation, and the unyielding human spirit to create a better world. That's it, nice and relaxed, thinking about how every aspect of their lives was shaped by the reality of living in a dirty world. And yet, they persevered. They found ways to be happy, to celebrate, to find beauty in their world despite all its challenges. They fell in love and got married and raised families. They wrote poetry, painted pictures, and composed music. They were human beings living human lives, just with a lot more sewage involved. The transformation that happened during the Victorian era, from the chaos of the early 1800s to the relative cleanliness of the early 1900s, represents one of the greatest improvements in public health in human history. It saved millions of lives, made modern urban life possible, and showed that with enough political will and engineering skill, even the most overwhelming problems could be solved. Your body feels heavy and comfortable, settling deeper as you think about the incredible resilience and ingenuity of people facing seemingly impossible challenges. But let's talk about something that really shows how different things were: women's hygiene during that time of the month. You know those convenient products you can just pick up at any store, the ones designed specifically for comfort and protection? Yeah, those didn't exist at all. Your muscles soften as you think about how much easier modern life is, even for the most basic biological functions. Victorian women had to get creative. And by creative, I mean they had to figure out how to deal with their periods using whatever they could find around the house. Most women used rags, literally just strips of cloth torn from old clothing or linens. They'd fold them up, position them as best they could, and hope for the best. These rags could be washed and reused, which was good because buying new fabric was expensive. But washing them was, well, let's just say it was another chore in an already long list of unpleasant tasks. You'd have to rinse them in cold water, hot water would set the stains, then scrub them with whatever soap you could afford, then hang them somewhere to dry. And where do you hang menstrual rags to dry? You can't exactly put them on the line outside for all the neighbors to see. So they'd hang them in bedrooms, in basements, anywhere private where they could air dry without causing scandal. A comfortable sigh escapes and you're suddenly very grateful for modern conveniences. Wealthy women had it slightly better. They could afford softer fabrics, maybe even some purpose-made cloths. But even they were caught in essentially the same endless cycle. Rags, washing, reusing, repeat. The really wealthy might have had servants to deal with the washing, but that meant, well, your most intimate hygiene was handled by strangers. People who were probably gossiping about it in the servants' quarters. Privacy? Pretty much non-existent when it came to personal hygiene. And here's the thing. Doctors of the time held some truly bizarre ideas about menstruation. They believed it was caused by hysteria, that women became temporarily insane during their periods. Their treatments were often cruel and misguided. Cold baths to shock the system, bloodletting to balance humors, and doses of mercury, the very same toxic substance we now know is deadly, prescribed to ease menstrual cramps. Your breathing slows naturally, settling deeper as you think about how little medical science truly understood women's bodies. The first disposable menstrual products didn't appear until the late 1800s, and even then, they were far from perfect. Early tampons were essentially just cotton wadding with no applicator. Pads were thick, bulky affairs attached to belts worn around the waist and outrageously expensive. Most women couldn't afford them, so they stuck with the rag system well into the 20th century. But at least by then, people were beginning to understand that menstruation was normal, that it wasn't caused by moral failing or mental illness, and that women didn't need to be locked away or treated like invalids once a month. Progress, but painfully slow progress. Speaking of medical treatments, oh boy, Victorian medicine was, let's say, experimental. Doctors didn't really understand the causes of most diseases, so their treatments were basically educated guesses, some of which were downright terrifying. Take bloodletting, for example. Doctors believed most illnesses stemmed from having too much blood, so their solution was to drain some out. They'd use leeches, make cuts in your arms, or apply special cups to suck blood through your skin. Feeling weak and dizzy? Must be too much blood. Headache? Definitely too much blood. Broken leg? Well, probably still too much blood. Somehow, nice and easy, just breathing. And thinking about how scary it must have been to get sick in an era when the cure might be worse than the disease. Mercury was the wonder drug of the Victorian era. Doctors prescribed it for everything: syphilis, depression, constipation, teething in babies. If you had a problem, mercury was probably going to be part of the solution. Of course, mercury is incredibly toxic. It causes brain damage, kidney failure, birth defects. But doctors didn't know that. They just knew that mercury seemed to do something when you gave it to patients. The fact that it was slowly poisoning them, well, that wasn't really understood until much later. People would come to doctors with minor ailments and leave with mercury poisoning, which caused new symptoms, which required more treatment, which often involved more mercury. It was a vicious cycle that probably killed more people than it helped. Opium was another popular treatment for everything. Couldn't sleep? Opium. In pain? Opium. Crying baby? Give the baby some opium. Yes, they gave opium to babies regularly. There were patent medicines specifically marketed for teething infants that were basically just opium syrup. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup was incredibly popular among mothers because it would instantly calm fussy babies. Your shoulders drop, releasing tension as you realize how dangerous everyday life was when nobody understood basic pharmacology. The thing is, opium did work. It relieved pain, helped people sleep, calmed anxiety, but it was also incredibly addictive. Victorian England had a massive opium addiction problem, partly because doctors were prescribing it for everything, and partly because people could buy it over the counter at any pharmacy. You could walk into a chemist's shop and buy laudanum, which was basically liquid opium, the same way you'd buy aspirin today. No prescription needed, no questions asked. Housewives were buying it for menstrual cramps and accidentally becoming opium addicts. Workers were using it for back pain and couldn't stop. Children were being given it for minor illnesses and developing dependencies before they could even walk. And nobody really understood why people kept wanting more and more of these medicines. Addiction wasn't well understood. People thought it was a moral failing, not a medical condition. Getting more comfortable now, muscles relaxing as you think about how much medical science has advanced. Surgery was basically a death sentence. There was no anesthesia until the very late Victorian period, and even then, it was dangerous and unpredictable. Most surgical procedures were done with the patient fully conscious, held down by assistants while the surgeon worked as quickly as possible. Can you imagine having a tooth pulled, or a limb amputated, or a tumor removed while you're completely awake and feeling everything? They'd give you a leather strap to bite down on and a shot of whiskey, and that was about it for pain management. Surgery was something you only did if the alternative was certain death. Even if you survived the procedure, infection was almost guaranteed. Doctors didn't understand that they should wash their hands or sterilize their instruments. They'd go from examining diseased corpses to performing surgery without even wiping their hands clean. Hospital infections killed injuries or illnesses. Going to a hospital was often riskier than just staying home and hoping for the best. A yawn escapes, and you're so grateful for modern medicine and sterile surgical procedures. Dentistry was even worse than regular medicine. Most people just lived with toothaches until the teeth fell out or the pain became absolutely unbearable. When they finally sought treatment, it usually meant extraction. And extractions were done without anesthesia, using pliers or other crude tools. The dentist, who was often just the local blacksmith or barber, would grab the tooth and yank it out as quickly as possible while you screamed. Rich people could afford to have false teeth made, but they were not great. Early dentures were carved from wood or made from the teeth of dead people, or even from animal teeth. They didn't fit well, made eating difficult, and rotted quickly. George Washington famously had multiple sets of dentures, and none of them worked very well. His last set was made from hippo teeth and gold wire. Can you imagine trying to eat with hippo teeth wired into your mouth? Most people just went without teeth. They'd eat soft foods, mumble when they talked, and look decades older than they actually were. Your breathing deepens, settling into the story as you think about how much we take modern dental care for granted. These were the guys who specialized in emptying cesspools and privies. They only worked at night because, well, the job was considered too disgusting for daylight hours. Can you imagine? The thought alone might make you shudder. The work was so gross that it was literally illegal to do it when people could see. The stench, the filth, the sheer nature of the task made it something hidden away in darkness, out of sight and mind. Your breathing naturally slows, settling deeper as you try to imagine living above a basement full of sewage, the damp, suffocating air, the invisible threats lurking in every breath. These night soil men would show up with shovels and buckets, and, well, they'd dig. They'd haul buckets of human waste up from the basement and load it onto carts. The smell during this process was indescribable, a pungent mix of decay, rot, and all the unmentionable things that come with waste left to fester in cramped, dark spaces. Neighbors would close their windows tightly, stuff rags under their doors, desperate attempts to keep the stench out, but somehow the foul odor would still seep through, invading homes, making the very walls seem to sweat with it. And where did all this waste go? Well, that's where it gets interesting. See, human waste was actually valuable. Farmers needed fertilizer, and, well, human poop makes excellent fertilizer, so the night soil men would sell it. They'd cart it out to farms outside the city and sell it to farmers who would spread it on their fields, which means the vegetables you'd eat for dinner were literally grown in human waste from the city where people were dying of cholera, typhoid, and God knows what else. The cycle was, well, it was pretty gross when you think about it. Getting more comfortable. And honestly, thinking about their farming practices makes you appreciate modern agriculture. But here's the thing. Even this system was breaking down. By the 1850s, London was just too big. Too many people producing too much waste. The night soilmen couldn't keep up. Cesspools were overflowing, streets were flooded with sewage when it rained, and diseases were spreading like wildfire. But here's something interesting. Despite all these medical challenges, people still tried to look their best. Beauty standards existed, and people went to incredible lengths to meet them. Pale skin was fashionable because it showed you didn't have to work outside in the sun. So, women would do everything possible to stay pale. They'd use parasols, wear long gloves, cover their faces with veils, and if natural paleness wasn't enough, they'd use makeup. Lead-based face powder was incredibly popular because it created a perfectly white, smooth complexion. The fact that lead causes brain damage and death? Well, that wasn't really understood. Women would literally poison themselves daily for the sake of fashion. Rouge was made with mercury or other toxic substances. Lipstick contained lead. Eyeliner was made with antimony, which could cause blindness. Getting ready for a fancy party meant covering yourself in toxic metals and hoping you didn't get sick before the evening was over. That's it. Nice and relaxed, muscles melting into the mattress, as you think about the irony of people trying to look healthy while slowly poisoning themselves. Hairstyling was another adventure. Without modern products, women had to get creative. They'd use sugar water to create hold, or beer to add body, and shine. They'd sleep with their hair wrapped around rags or sticks to create curls, and they'd rarely wash it. Remember, hair washing was a monthly event at best. So all these styling products would just accumulate, layer after layer of sugar, beer, pomade, powder, all building up over weeks until it formed a kind of helmet around their heads. The smell must have been complex, sweet, sour, and rancid all at the same time. Wealthy women might have elaborate wigs instead of styling their natural hair. These wigs were, well, they were works of art. Towering structures with feathers, jewels, and even miniature ships or gardens built into them. But wigs had their own problems. They were hot and heavy, they attracted lice and other insects, and they were expensive to maintain. You had to take them to a specialist to be cleaned and restyled. Plus, if you wore the same wig for weeks at a time, well, your scalp underneath wasn't getting much air or cleaning. Scalp infections were common among fashionable women. Your body feels heavy and comfortable, settling deeper as you imagine the discomfort of wearing a massive insect-infested wig just to look fashionable. Picture it, a towering pile of hair, powdered, perfumed, decorated with feathers or even tiny props, but crawling with lice. Heavy on your scalp, itchy against your skin, suffocating your pores. But back then, it was all about appearances. Pain was just part of the package. Men had their own grooming struggles. There were no safety razors, no buzz cuts, no electric shavers. Shaving meant using a straight razor, basically a long, sharp knife held up to your throat each morning. No protective guards, no forgiving design. Just you, a bit of soap, and a steady hand. And if your hand wasn't steady enough, well, you might end up with more than a clean shave. Most men didn't even try to do it themselves. They'd go to a barber, but that came with its own risks. Barbers didn't sterilize their tools. Not really. They'd use the same blade on dozens of men in a single day. No alcohol wipes, no hot water rinse. Just a quick strop on leather and on to the next customer. So you might walk in for a trim and leave with someone else's skin infection, or something worse. Wealthier men might have had their own personal razors, but even then, keeping them sharp and clean was a chore. You had to know how to hone the blade, oil it, store it properly. Grooming wasn't simple. It was an ongoing battle with rust, dull edges, and bacteria. Maybe that's why facial hair became so popular. A full beard or a thick mustache required far less maintenance than a daily shave with a straight-edge blade. You could just let it grow, trim it occasionally, and call it done. Safer, easier, but not necessarily cleaner, because here's the catch. Facial hair became little sponges for the world around you. Victorian air was thick with coal, smoke, soot, pipe tobacco, dust, and who knows what else. Mustaches would trap food crumbs, cigarette ash, flecks of dirt, all the little particles drifting through the air. A gentleman's beard was less a fashion statement and more like a filter for pollution. A comfortable sigh escapes you as you think about how easy it is today. Razors that won't kill you, hot running water, shampoo, clean towels, privacy, hygiene that doesn't come with a side of tetanus. Still, for those without access to private bathrooms, and that was most people, bathing was another story. Public baths began to pop up in some cities, and they were a game changer, at least in theory. These weren't fancy spas, they were giant pools, big open rooms where dozens of people bathed at the same time. Water wasn't filtered, it wasn't even replaced very often. There were no disinfectants, no chlorine, no UV sanitizers, just warm, cloudy water shared between everyone. And who came to bathe? Everyone. Workers, caked in grime. Sick people hoping the water would soothe their symptoms. Folks with rashes, open sores, infections, the skin conditions you'd rather not imagine, all soaking in the same soup. If you were lucky, you left feeling cleaner. If not, you might leave with something contagious. So yes, public baths were an improvement, better than not bathing at all, but they were also breeding grounds for disease, a communal attempt at cleanliness that sometimes made things worse before they got better. Still, they were popular because, for many people, it was the only chance they had for a real, full-body wash. Workers would save up their pennies to afford a visit to the public baths once a week or once a month. The experience was social. People would chat, gossip, and conduct business. It was like a community center that happened to involve being naked in dirty water with strangers. Nice and easy, just breathing and thinking about how different social norms were when privacy was such a luxury. Despite all these challenges, people found ways to feel good about themselves. They developed their own standards of cleanliness within the constraints of their world. They took pride in having clean hands and faces, even if the rest of them wasn't so fresh. They valued nice clothing, good grooming, and pleasant breath. They used what resources they had to present themselves as well as possible, and they adapted. They became accustomed to smells that would horrify us today. They developed tolerance for discomfort that seems incredible by modern standards. In a way, it's impressive. These people were incredibly resilient. They lived full, rich lives despite conditions that we would consider intolerable. Your muscles continue to relax, sinking deeper into comfort as you think about human adaptability and resilience. Children grew up in this environment and thought it was normal. They played in streets filled with garbage and sewage. They helped their families with laundry and chamber pots and all the unglamorous tasks of daily survival. They still found ways to be children, to play games, tell stories, and laugh with their friends. They adapted to their world, just like children always do. The wealthy tried to shield their children from the worst of it. But even rich kids lived in a world without antibiotics, without vaccines, and without a basic understanding of hygiene and disease prevention. Childhood mortality was heartbreakingly high. Families would have many children, knowing that only some of them would survive to adulthood. Parents couldn't protect their children from diseases they didn't yet. Yet people still fell in love, got married, and had families. They still celebrated holidays and birthdays. They still had hopes and dreams for the future. They were living human lives in a world that was challenging in ways we can barely imagine. Getting cozy now, really settling in, and feeling a deep appreciation for all the invisible systems that keep us healthy and safe today. Now, let's talk about food. Because Victorian food hygiene was, well, let's just say you'd probably lose a lot of weight if you had to eat like a Victorian. Not because the food was healthy, but because you'd be too terrified to eat most of it. Your muscles relax as you think about that clean, safe refrigerator in your kitchen full of food that won't kill you. See, refrigeration didn't exist at all. The best people could do was ice boxes. Ice was expensive and hard to come by. Most people just kept their food at room temperature and hoped for the best. This meant that meats started going bad almost immediately after slaughter. Milk would sour within hours in warm weather, and vegetables would rot quickly without proper storage. So, how did people deal with this? Well, they got creative. And by creative, I mean they developed some truly questionable preservation methods. Salt was huge. People would pack meat in so much salt that it was basically mummified. It would last longer, but it was also, well, incredibly salty, tough, and not particularly nutritious after all that processing. Smoking was popular too. They'd hang meat in smokehouses for days or weeks, letting the smoke slowly dry and preserve it. Again, it lasted longer, but it was also carcinogenic as hell. People were basically eating charcoal-flavored jerky for most of their protein. A yawn escapes, and you're so grateful for modern food safety regulations. Pickling was another option. They'd soak vegetables in vinegar or brine for months at a time. Everything was pickled: cabbage, onions, eggs, even meat sometimes. The acid would kill bacteria and preserve the food, but it also made everything taste, well, like vinegar. Imagine eating pickled everything for months on end. Your poor stomach must have been under constant siege. And then, when preservation methods failed, there was the desperate reality: eating food that was already going bad and just hoping it wouldn't kill you. Meat starting to turn green, cover it in a mountain of spices and cook it thoroughly. Milk beginning to curdle, turn it into cheese. Bread growing moldy, cut off the worst parts and eat the rest. People developed iron stomachs out of sheer necessity. They had to. The alternative was starvation. Your breathing naturally slows, settling deeper as you realize how much we take food safety for granted today. But here's the truly terrifying part. People couldn't tell what was safe and what wasn't. There were no expiration dates, no health inspectors, no knowledge of bacteria or foodborne illness. So when someone ate spoiled food and fell sick, they blamed it on bad air, evil spirits, or just plain bad luck. They never connected rotten food to disease. Milk was especially dangerous. Unscrupulous vendors often watered it down, and the water they used was often the very same contaminated water everyone else was drinking. So you'd buy milk expecting something nourishing and end up with diluted sewage water mixed with a splash of actual milk. Baby formula wasn't a thing either. If a mother couldn't breastfeed, babies were fed cow's milk, goat's milk, or whatever was available. Often this milk was contaminated or spoiled. Infant mortality from digestive illnesses was heartbreakingly common. Even when food was fresh, preparation was risky. Kitchens were dirty and knives were rarely cleaned properly. People didn't understand cross-contamination. You'd cut raw meat on a wooden board, then slice bread on the same board without washing it in between. You're getting more comfortable now, settling deeper as you start thinking about how many invisible food safety measures protect us every single day. And working conditions, they made everything worse. If you worked in a factory, you'd be covered in soot and chemical residue all day. Then you'd come home and handle food with those same unwashed hands. Factory workers often ate their lunches right on the factory floor, surrounded by machinery that was leaking oil and spewing toxic fumes. They'd unwrap a piece of bread and eat it while breathing in lead dust or mercury vapor. Miners had it even worse. They'd spend all day underground, covered in coal dust or mineral particles, then eat their meals down in the mine. Black lung disease was common, partly from breathing contaminated air while eating. And agricultural workers, they were handling manure all day, both human and animal manure, remember, then eating their lunches with those same hands. No wonder disease spread so quickly in rural areas. People just didn't connect hygiene with health. They thought disease was caused by moral failings or bad luck or supernatural forces. The idea that washing your hands before eating could prevent illness was revolutionary. Your shoulders drop, releasing that tension as you think about how basic hand washing has saved millions of lives. Even the wealthy had problems with food safety. Their cooks might have been better trained, but they were still working with the same spoiled ingredients and contaminated water as everyone else. Rich people could afford more variety in their diet, but variety didn't necessarily mean safety. They'd import exotic foods from other countries. Foods that had been sitting in ship holds for months without refrigeration, tropical fruits that were rotting from the inside out, spices that were full of insects. Now imagine the sheer exhaustion and risk these workers faced every single day. Covered in grime and toxins, their bodies were battlegrounds of invisible threats. Eating lunch surrounded by hazardous fumes or deep underground with the suffocating dust wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a slow poison. And the hands that worked relentlessly exposed to filth and chemicals went unwashed because no one yet understood the link between cleanliness and survival. Every meal was a gamble, every breath a potential risk. The idea that something as simple as washing your hands could save lives was a revelation that reshaped public health forever. Meanwhile, the wealthy, despite their comforts, were not immune to danger. Their exotic foods carried hidden perils, rotting fruits and insect-infested spices, reminders that wealth could not buy immunity from the realities of the time. This reflection makes us deeply appreciate the modern knowledge and infrastructure we often overlook, how far we've come from those hazardous days, and how vital the simplest acts of hygiene truly are. And mold, and fancy Victorian dinner parties, those elaborate multi-course meals that lasted for hours. The food was sitting out at room temperature the entire time. By the time they got to the 7th or 8th course, they were basically eating science experiments. Plus, wealthy people had this weird obsession with foods that were, well, intentionally gross. They'd eat things like potted meat, which was basically any kind of meat ground up and mixed with fat and spices, then packed into jars and left to ferment. They thought fermented foods were sophisticated. They'd eat cheese that was literally crawling with maggots and consider it a delicacy. Nice and easy, just breathing. And honestly, some Victorian delicacies sound absolutely horrifying. The poor had their own food challenges. They couldn't afford fresh meat or vegetables most of the time, so they'd buy whatever was cheapest, which was usually whatever was about to go bad that the vendors couldn't sell to anyone else. There were markets specifically for secondhand food, meat that was starting to turn, produce that was bruised or rotting, dairy products that were past their prime. Poor people would shop these markets because it was all they could afford. And street vendors, oh boy. Street vendors would sell food that had been sitting out in the sun all day, covered in flies and dust. After exploring these fascinating and sometimes unsettling glimpses into Victorian life, the smells, the struggles, the misunderstood medical practices, how do you feel about what you've just heard? Has it changed the way you see the past or even our present comforts? If you enjoyed this video and found it interesting, please leave a comment down below to share your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more captivating stories and insights. And before you go, we wish you a peaceful and restful night. Sweet dreams to you all.